Hey everyone, and welcome to Slumber Reads. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Liking the video only takes just a quick second and it helps out the channel immensely. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated as I post content just like this, roughly every 5 days. That's at least what I aim for. Anyway, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad break after this intro. There will not be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Last night at exactly 2:17 a.m., my phone began to ring. The number on the screen was mine. Not merely similar, it was my full number, including the country code, the same number printed on my business cards and displayed in my phone settings. I stared at it until the final ring. Then the call stopped. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. I pressed play. For the first few seconds, there was only quiet breathing. Then I heard my own voice. 10 seconds after you finish listening, someone will knock on your front door. Don't open it. The message ended. I almost laughed. Someone had spoofed my number and used software to imitate my voice. It was unsettling, but hardly supernatural. Then someone knocked. 10 seconds after the recording stopped. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I lived alone on the 7th floor. The building's entrance locked automatically at night, and the elevator had been broken all week. I approached the door without making a sound and looked through the peephole. The corridor was empty. My phone rang again. My number. This time I answered. "Do not speak," the voice said immediately. "It doesn't know whether you're home yet." I remained silent. "Turn off every light in the apartment." I should have hung up. I should have called the police. Instead, I obeyed. As soon as the last lamp went dark, something dragged a fingernail down the other side of my front door. The sound was slow and uneven, as though the finger had too many joints. "Good," the voice whispered through the phone. "Now go to the bedroom. Don't look into any mirrors." I crossed the hallway, keeping my eyes on the floor. As I passed the bathroom, I heard a soft tap against the glass inside. Then another. Something was tapping from the other side of the mirror. I entered the bedroom and closed the door. "Get under the bed," the voice instructed. I froze. "There isn't enough room." "There will be." A space beneath my bed was packed with storage boxes. But when I knelt, they were gone. Beneath the mattress was a deep black opening that seemed to extend far beyond the bedroom wall. A smell drifted from it, wet soil and old breath. I refused to crawl inside. The voice on the phone sighed. "That's what I did too." "What do you mean?" I whispered. The line went silent. Then my own voice screamed. "Why did you answer me?" Every door in the apartment slammed at once. My phone spoke again. "From now on, whatever you hear, do not answer in your own voice." A child began crying inside my wardrobe. "Dad," she whispered, "please let me out." "I don't have a daughter." The wardrobe doors shook. "Dad, there's someone in here with me." I covered my mouth. The crying stopped. Something inside the wardrobe sniffed the air. Then it spoke in my mother's voice. She had been dead for 11 years. "Daniel?" It sighed gently. "I'm frightened." My hand tightened around the phone. "Don't listen," my voice warned. "It tries the dead first." The wardrobe doors opened by themselves. There was no one inside. Only my clothes, hanging motionless in the dark. Then I noticed the feet. 2 bare feet were visible beneath the longest coat, facing the wrong direction. I stepped backward. The thing hidden among my clothes whispered in my mother's voice. "Tell me you remember what you did." I couldn't breathe. Nobody knew about the accident. Nobody knew I had been driving. My mother had taken the blame because I was 17. She told the police she had lost control of the car. She protected me, even after the crash left her unable to walk. She died 3 years later. The official cause was an infection, but I knew why she stopped taking her medication. "Tell me," the wardrobe demanded. My lips parted. The voice on the phone shouted, "Don't answer." The thing stepped out. It wore my mother's nightgown, but its body was too tall and thin. Its face remained hidden behind long gray hair. With every step, its backward feet cracked against the floor and twisted around to follow it. I stumbled toward the bedroom door. "Where do I go?" I asked the phone. The thing stopped. The line became perfectly quiet. I realized my mistake. I had spoken to my own voice. My mother's shape lifted its head. There was no face beneath the hair, only a phone pressed into a cavity where its mouth should have been. From that phone came my voice. "Now it knows which one you are." I ran into the hallway. In the mirror beside the entrance, my reflection wasn't running. It stood still, shaking its head slowly, pointing at the ceiling behind me. The tall thing wearing my mother's nightgown was crawling toward me along the ceiling. Then my phone screen lit up. A video call had started. I saw a road at night, filmed from inside a car, rain on the windshield, headlights swinging across wet asphalt. I knew that road. I saw my own hands on the steering wheel, 17 years old, knuckles white. And in the passenger seat, my mother turned to the camera and said, "Tell me you remember what you did." The car swerved. The screen went black. The creature dropped from the ceiling. I threw the phone at it and tore the front door open. The corridor was empty. At the far end, the elevator doors stood open. The elevator had been broken all week. Inside was a woman facing the corner. She wore a hospital gown. A folded wheelchair leaned against the wall beside her, as though she no longer needed it. "Daniel," she said without turning around. "Get in. It won't follow you while I'm here." I knew that voice. I had heard it every day for 17 years. And then, never again. Behind me, something walked out of my apartment. I ran to the elevator. The doors closed just before the thing reached us. As we descended, my mother finally turned around. She had a face, her real face. Tired, kind, exactly as I remembered it from the hospital. "I came for you the night of the accident," she said quietly. "At 2:17, that's when the car hit the barrier. That's when it always comes." The floor numbers changed. 7, 6. It only wants one thing, a confession spoken aloud in your own voice. That's how it takes you. She looked down at her hands. "So I answered it first. I told it I was driving. It believed me. They always believe a confession." 5. It took my legs that night, then slowly everything else. But it never touched you. She smiled the way she used to smile when she was lying to me about the pain. That was the trade. 4. But trades expire, Daniel. 11 years. Then it comes back to check who was really behind the wheel. 3. It will keep coming. Every night at 2:17. And if it can't take you, 2. It will wait for someone you love. The way I couldn't let it wait for you. 1. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto my bedroom. Someone was asleep in my bed. It wasn't me. It was a boy, maybe 10 years old. I had never seen him before, but he had my mother's nose and my hands, and when he stirred in his sleep, he mumbled a word that sounded like, "Dad." A son I don't have. A son I might, someday. The phone on the nightstand lit up and began to ring. The number on the screen was his own. The boy reached for it. It tries the future, too, my mother whispered behind me, if there's no one left in the past. I stepped out of the elevator. I picked up the phone before the boy could reach it, and for the first time in 11 years, I answered my own voice. I was driving, I said. It was me. It was always me. The line was silent for a long moment. Then something on the other end exhaled, slow and satisfied, and my own voice, calm, almost gentle, replied, "Finally." The bedroom dissolved. The boy, the bed, the elevator, my mother's face. Everything folded into darkness, and the darkness smelled of wet soil and old breath. I'm writing this from under the bed. I don't know whose bed. The space down here is bigger than it should be, and somewhere far above me, I can hear footsteps in an apartment that used to be mine. My phone still works. It only makes one kind of call. Tonight, at 2:17, I will dial a number. Someone will look at their screen and see their own number calling, and when they listen to the voicemail, they'll hear their own voice, because down here, that's the only voice the phone lets you use. If that someone is you, I need you to understand. The voice on the phone isn't the monster. It's someone like me, trying to keep you alive the way someone once kept me alive. Follow the instructions. Stay quiet, stay hidden, and no matter what it shows you, no matter what it knows about you, remember the only rule that matters. Don't answer in your own voice, unless you're ready to pay for what you did. The air was thick and hot when Travis's mom shook me awake. She did so quietly, as not to disturb the 4 other boys slumped around the basement, snoring in their sleeping bags. Sweat stuck my shirt to my skin as a spindly hand with gel-dipped nails gently rocked my shoulder. "Wake up, honey," she whispered sweetly. Fuzz danced before my groggy eyes as I turned to face her. She let out a soothing shush as I showed signs of life. "Come with me. Let's be quiet now." My eyes adjusted to the pitch black of the room while she guided me through the sea of my sleeping friends. Shag carpet brushed the underside of my bare feet. She kept one hand on my shoulder, navigating us through a labyrinth of Risk figurines and empty soda cans until we reached the stairs. She moved my hand to find the railing, and nudged me up the stairs ahead of her with a hand to my lower back. I had been too tired to ask what was happening when she first woke me up, but I remember thinking it was strange that she didn't turn on any lights after we emerged into the kitchen. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaky from sleep. "Shh." She shut the door to the basement behind me. "Do you want anything to drink? Chocolate milk?" "No, thank you." She dropped down to a crouch. A sparse beam of moonlight hit her face as she met me at my eye level. "I want to show you something." I didn't know Travis's mom very well. Travis and I were in the same class at school, and I would come over regularly, and I believe our moms were in the same book club for a bit. But this was only the second time I had slept over at his house. She led me through a pair of swinging doors into an ornate dining room. There was a long wooden dining table with beautiful etchings carved into the side. The wood was a deep red matching that of a grand china cabinet along the north wall. Inside was a dusty collection of heirlooms, glass trinkets, metal goblets, books, and vials of sand. Travis's family had never struck me as well off. I remember my house being much bigger than his, but this room gave a sense of history and wealth that clashed with the rest of the humble estate. I had never been in that room before, nor had I seen anyone come in or out of it. We ate dinner in the kitchen earlier that night, and Travis always told me we weren't allowed to play in there. The dining table was done up with a large white cloth in the center, sigils woven into the frayed edges. A single candle sat in the middle, a short, stout cylinder of dark red wax sitting atop a gold dish, its wick already lit. A small circle of tea candles busied the table around it, and Travis's mom began to light them with the center candle's flame after ushering me to take a seat at the head of the table. "What's going on?" I asked again, and she shushed me again softly with a comforting grin. The fire bounced off the whites of her eyes. In the candlelight, I finally took note of her dress. Travis's mom never stood out to me against the other moms of my friends. She usually wore a similar blend of activewear and business casual attire, if only from lower-end retailers. But tonight, she was dressed differently. A lacy, white nightdress clung to the top of her body, cut low around her chest. The bottom billowed beneath her, loose and breezy against her slender frame. Her hair was adorned with beads and small braids, a style I had never seen her wear before. A necklace sat above the low cut of her dress, dangling on it an eclectic collection of charms and seashells and large teeth from some animal. Her odd costume took me off guard, and before I could speak, "There's nothing to worry about. I just need you to help me with something wonderful." I didn't know how to respond to that. She was so calm, talking so sweetly, but with each word my heart started to beat faster. She glided over to the china cabinet and produced a decorative brass key from her bosom. She turned it in the lock with a heavy clunk. As she did so, the family cat hopped into a chair at the other end of the table. Ours were the only two seats at the table, one on each end. The cat had its eyes fixed on me, its head just barely peeking over the table, and I stared right back. I can't remember its name. Travis's mom went about placing a few more objects in front of me. A small leather-bound book, a pair of large, swirling seashells, a wooden jewelry box, and a thin vial of sand. The cat did not move or blink. Its shadow towered high behind it against the wall of the dining room, dancing in the light of the flames. The longer it stared at me, the more I felt like something bad would happen if I looked away. I felt a pair of hands slide onto my shoulders. Travis's mom stood behind me, leaning over me. Her bony fingers traced their way slowly down my forearms. Sweat drenched my brow. I dared not say a word as her hands gripped mine, and she leaned in close to my ear and whispered, "Open." I turned my sweaty palms to the sky and felt the fabric of her dress brush against me as she plucked the vial of sand off the table, pulled the cork from its lip, and turned it over onto my waiting palm. Coarse, dark sediment poured onto my skin, forming a small pile which caked at the bottom, mixing with my sweat. It was all so bizarre, all happening so smoothly and so fast, that I couldn't find it in myself to ask why. She tapped the underside of the empty vial with her finger, then brought it back behind me. The cat continued to stare. I saw endless tunnels in its eyes. When her hands reappeared in front of me, they held a small golden pair of grooming scissors, a curious little trinket. They were molded to look like the body and beak of an exotic bird, shimmering and impeccably sharp. "This is the only hard part," she said, her breath hot on the back of my neck. My heart leapt out of my chest. "After this, it's just beautiful," she cooed. The fingers of her left hand intertwined with mine as she raised the blades in her right. Swift as the wind, she brought the point of the scissors down onto the center of my palm. I gasped, and she tightened her grip on my hand. A small bead of crimson formed on my palm as she hummed a mellow tone. It was not a deep cut. I had barely felt the pinch. I was amazed my right hand did not recoil in shock. Not a single grain of sand spilled from it. She placed the scissors on the table in front of me. "Now," she said, taking both my hands once again. She slowly brought them to meet each other in front of us, and guided me in rubbing them together. Sand and sweat mixed with blood. The cat licked its lips. She had me cup both hands together and brought them up to my face. "Blow as hard as you can, sweetie," she said. "Blow it into the fire." I did. As the mixture hit the flame, it shot about an inch higher into the air and became bright blue. What I saw next, I lack the words to describe, because across from me at the table, I still saw the cat, but at the same time I saw someone else, like they were both in the same space, but worlds away. That person, sharing the space of the cat, had many faces. They were all faces I knew, and they all wore an extremely specific expression. I saw the faces of my parents, my friends, some of my neighbors and relatives and teachers. Every peer and authority figure I had ever known shared that chair with the cat. I saw many, many faces that I recognized, and they all stared back with an unmistakable look of disappointment. Like they had all caught me doing something unforgivable, all ashamed with a hint of pity. And then the wick went out. Tea candles still glowing. The cat licked its paw and jumped off the chair onto the floor. Doors creaked slightly as it slid past them and disappeared into the kitchen. I sat rubbing my palm, dumbfounded. Travis's mom swung around the side of the table and crouched down to look into my eyes. "You did so good," she gasped, her voice bubbly with a strange air of pride. I felt my cheeks blush. I don't know why, but I was flattered. "Okay, so one last thing and you can go back to bed," she sang. She opened the jewelry box and from it, she drew out a dark red cherry. I instinctively held out my hand, but she popped it into her own mouth with a giggle. She winked as she chewed it, then reached between her lips and pulled the pit out from behind her teeth. She took my hands in hers for the last time, and placed the cherry pit on my sore palm. She closed our hands around it, and looked deeply into my eyes. "This part is very important, Caleb," she said. There was an unprecedented firmness in her voice, her smile gone. "I want you to take this out to the backyard. I want you to find a nice spot, whatever spot feels right to you, and I want you to bury it. Cover it with dirt. It doesn't have to be too deep. Just make sure it's covered." She patted the top of my hands. "And once you do that, we're never going to talk about this again, okay? I don't want you to tell anyone about this. Just go back downstairs and go back to sleep. Don't tell Travis. Don't tell your parents, or your teachers, or your doctor, or the priests at church. Don't even tell me. And I won't ever tell you. Okay?" I was confused, but I nodded. She seemed serious, but still let out a slight smile. "Thank you. I knew I could trust you, Caleb. You're very mature." She stood up and walked me back through the kitchen to a sliding glass door that led out into the yard. "Remember," she said, "once it's buried, once you come back inside, we never talk about this ever again." I nodded. "It never happened." I nodded again. "Good." She brushed my hair out of my eyes and slid open the door. The sun had just begun to rise. A few stray beams crested the trees in the distance, their promise of a new day painting the sky a deep turquoise. Blades of wet grass danced between my toes as I paced the yard. Cherry pit clutched in my hand, searching for a spot. I looked over my shoulder to see Travis's mom watching from inside, arms crossed. A couple steps away, I saw a small hole that had already been dug in the dirt. A little pile of upturned earth sat beside it. I remembered what she said about finding what I thought was the perfect spot for it. I was confused. It was supposed to be my choice, but the hole was already there, waiting for me. I figured it was as good a spot as any. I knelt down, dropped the pit in the hole, swept the soil over it, and started back towards the house. Travis's mom was gone. I made my way back downstairs. dirt clinging to my palms, sand beneath my nails, a speck of dried blood in the center of my left hand. I didn't bother to wash them off. I laid back to rest as the morning sun crept into the basement. I took a look around at my friends, feeling oddly distant from them. I crawled back in my sleeping bag and drifted off. When I woke, the room was already abuzz. A couple of my friends were playing Halo while Travis rolled up his sleeping bag. I looked down at my hands and they were clean. In the center of my left palm sat a small mark of red skin, raised ever so slightly. I pressed into it with my thumb and felt no pain. The mark was barely even noticeable, about the size of a bug bite. "You good?" Travis eyed me up and down. I realized I was drenched in sweat. "Yeah," I lied. "I'm okay." "Okay, cool," he said. "We were waiting on you. My mom made French toast." Travis's mom didn't look in my direction as we entered the kitchen. She was back in her normal soccer mom attire, a thin bathrobe draped over sweatpants. She went about serving up toast from her skillet without a glance, barely acknowledged me as she made her way around the table and popped a slice on my plate. One by one, my friends laced up their shoes as their parents arrived to pick them up. I tried playing video games with Travis, but couldn't shake the weird, sinking feeling in the pit of my chest. "Caleb, honey, your mom is here," Travis's mom called down the stairs. I said my goodbyes and made my way up the stairs again, sleeping bag in tow. Travis's mom kept her back to me again as she washed the dishes from breakfast. I thought about saying something, but I remembered what she had said. I remember the disappointed faces. I remembered my promise. All I could croak out was a simple, "Bye." She finally smiled over her shoulder at me. No hint of anything in her eyes. No secret intonation. Nothing to suggest that there was air to clear between us. "Have a good day, sweetie. Tell your mom I said hi." When I walked out of that house, I left the night behind me. It has taken so long for me to even find it in my head. I didn't see Travis's mom much after that. Only here and there, only from afar, at the neighborhood pool or when she would come to pick him up from school. I avoided Travis for a while, but started to feel bad when I could tell it was hurting his feelings. Slowly, I started inviting him over to my place again, but I made sure I never went back over to his. Travis's mom never spoke to me about that night, and I never told anyone either. After a while, I started to wonder if it had even happened. The mark from my hand faded a day or so later, and the more I thought about that strange night, the more it felt like something I must have dreamt. Whenever she saw me, it was nothing but warm smiles and kind eyes. Never a wink, never a glance. Surely there would be some weirdness if that had all really happened. Surely there would be some inkling of recognition, some moment that she broke character and mentioned what we did. Surely one day she would pull me aside and let me know what it was all about. But that day never came, so I put the whole thing away at the back of my mind. Until recently, I wasn't able to trace any of the horrible things that have happened back to any particular moment. In retrospect, however, it all makes so much sense. Looking back now, I know for sure that was the moment it started. Travis and I were only friends for a year or so after that. When we hit the 4th grade, he transferred to a different school, a private school where only rich kids went. We didn't keep in touch, and I ended up moving not too much later anyway. It wasn't something my parents wanted to do. They had been fighting for quite some time. I don't remember them being like that earlier in my childhood, but by the time I was 11, they were at each other's throats every night. I guess the relocation was a last-ditch effort to keep it together, and I guess it didn't work. Something about a smaller house and a crappier town just made it all worse. I later found out that their arguing was a result of my mother's diagnosis with a rare form of heart disease, from which she passed a year after the move. Apparently her treatment had wreaked havoc on our family's finances. You might think that's an insane thing for my father to blame her for, and you'd be right, but he did regardless. He began drinking heavily once she was gone. He had a problem for years prior, but her passing was an excuse to be more open about it. His liver gave up the year I turned 18, just old enough to avoid the foster system, but too young to have any sort of firm footing in life. College had already been out of the question, and the absolutely minuscule inheritance I received made it clear why. Considering all the debt I assumed with the house, I might as well have not received anything. Jobs have been hard to come by and hard to hold down. Fast food, janitorial work, delivery, odd jobs here and there. It's always felt like no matter how hard I tried, anytime I get close to being up on my feet financially, a rug would get pulled. Random layoffs, freak accidents, car trouble. Something bad happens and it's on to the next one. In so many words, my entire life has been a constant string of misfortune for as long as I can clearly remember. An endless carousel of crap luck. Ever since that night, any inkling of happiness snuffed out the moment it started to show. That is, until this summer. I can't fully describe it, but a few weeks ago, out of nowhere, the sun came out for the first time in well over a decade. It felt like a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I woke up one morning, and the world felt a little brighter, a little more welcoming. I'm really struggling to put it into words. Everything just felt better. That probably sounds stupid, but it was a palpable difference, a significant shift in general atmosphere, so much so that I literally wrote down the day, May 20th, 2026. It was infinitely easier to get out of bed in the morning. I started getting in a groove at work, found myself shooting the crap with the other dishwashers. I even went on a date. My first date since high school that didn't end in an awkward hug goodbye, and the knowledge that I'd never see them again. I've had a hard time being intimate with anyone in my adult life, but it finally feels possible now. After a whole month passed with no unexpected setbacks or ugly news, I got curious. I went to the library and got on one of the computers and looked up that date, May 20th, 2026. I browsed the news tab on Google waiting for anything to jump out at me. I don't even know what I was looking for. Some sort of cosmic insight, some hint as to what could possibly happen to change my life in such a subtle, yet significant way. After a couple scrolls, I came across a pair of familiar faces that made my stomach sink through the floor. The first face was hers. There she was. After all these years, she stood in my monitor, glammed up in a pleated pantsuit. The article was posted by a local newspaper from my hometown. The headline: State Congresswoman slain by home invader. I sat there for what felt like hours. Just seeing her again brought back so much. Finally, I opened the page, and that's where I saw the next familiar face. I was about 15 years removed, but I still recognized the name, and in his eyes, I still saw my friend. The guy who killed her, I knew him. He was in my class. I knew him when we were kids. I went straight to my car and started driving. I live about 6 hours away from my hometown, and I didn't stop once. Not for food, not even to use the restroom. I don't know what possessed me. I don't know what I wanted to find there. I just knew I had to go. The sun was starting to set when I got to my old neighborhood. Muscle memory took over and I started tracing down the route I used to ride my bike to Travis's house. Within a couple minutes, I was outside. The house was significantly larger than I remembered it. I could clearly make out where the skeleton ended and the additions began, but they had built so much onto it over the years that I barely even recognized it. New rooms had been added on all sides. A beautiful wraparound porch, a 3-car garage, a second story, a sunroom with magnificent glass walls where the sliding door to the backyard once was. I parked and got out for a closer look. No signs of life as I wrapped around the sunroom towards the backyard. A chest-high picket fence blocked my path. but did nothing to obstruct the view. Dotting the lawn, I found a grove of about 20 cherry trees. Each one stood tall, branches full of fruit. Sorry, sport. You'll have to stay late tonight. Dang, I guess I'll be missing Friday night at the bar with my friends. I just completed my first week as a custodian at Riverside Memories Retirement Community when my supervisor called me into his office and sat me down. Don't worry, you'll be getting overtime and double pay for the night, along with some training and guidance from another worker. He's done this for a while, so he can go over everything more in depth. Drew's watch sounded as soon as the clock hit 6, and he clicked the side button to turn it off. The mention of double pay made the FOMO of not seeing my friends disappear. You'll be hosting the monthly bingo night this evening, Drew said, returning his attention to me from his watch. I already didn't like spending time with the residents. Their horrible aim in the bathroom gave me reason enough. But having to spend hours with them in a cold, smelly, and nearly lifeless room, it was like my worst nightmare coming true. But the silver lining of double pay made it sound manageable. I know this wasn't in your job description, but management would recognize you for standing up and going above and beyond. Can we count on you tonight? Drew said, his eyes flickering from his watch to me. Yeah, I can do that, I said, nodding in agreement. Drew clapped his hands together and stood up. Great. I'll explain some things as we walk down to the event center. Drew stood up, grabbed his raincoat and his leather laptop bag, and ushered me out the door. We headed towards the elevators silently. Drew kept fiddling with his watch and turning his head to look at me. I kept my head forward, afraid of making eye contact with him. I really had no idea what type of person Drew was. I only interacted with him in my initial interview, and moments ago when he called me into his room. He seemed to pick up on the fact that his constant fiddling made me nervous. So he finally spoke again. Don't worry, I'm nervous too. We've never had someone this new run a bingo night, but I'm sure you'll be fine. His words didn't do much to quell the anxiety. The person who usually ran it quit so suddenly that it shocked us all, even the residents. Not to hold you to too high a standard, but she was a great announcer. And she knew how to make the elderly laugh. She quit last month, but everything has been so busy around here, from dining services to event planning, that I didn't even remember we had lost her until today. Drew pushed the elevator button and quietly waited. May I ask why she quit? I voiced a question that made Drew harden in hesitation. She got dealt an unlucky hand in life, stuff outside of her control. I don't think I can share any more with you, he said as we entered the elevator. Oh, no worries. I get it. I figured some employer or employee act was made to protect her privacy. The rest of the ride was quiet as Drew continued to move his watch around with shaking hands. The elevator doors opened right near the event center, where the wide glass double doors were open, and I saw a tall, dark-complexioned man setting up long, folded plastic tables and chairs. It had a little stage with curtains and a projector, with a few closet doors on either side of the stairs and ramps up to it. The room was large and bare, with plaster white walls adorned with generic pictures of mountains and creeks. Each wall was also adorned with paintings or artworks from some of the residents, some of which were hard to believe they weren't kept in a museum. The carpet was thin and sounded more like a tile floor as I walked across it. The tall man came out from a large closet with a few chairs under his arms. Once he noticed our presence, he attempted a wave, but only managed to drop a few of the chairs. He was wearing a black hoodie with the company name and logo plastered on the front. He had long gray jean shorts and shoes that gave him another few inches past his already biologically allowed height. That's Jaden. He's been doing this for a while, so he can tell you all of the specifics. I have to talk with him really quickly. So it's best you set up some more chairs and the ball cage. Thanks again. Drew hurried off to help Jaden pick up the chairs and talk with him. A conversation that got heated fast. I couldn't hear what Drew was saying, but Jaden was clearly animated. His voice was harsh and loud, as if he were scolding Drew. I could hear him protest even when I was deep inside the closet, struggling to hold on to a large folding table. You just keep bringing younger and younger people in, don't you? Why is that? You know the type. The remnants of Jaden's voice echoed into the closet, as well as the loud and demanding shush of persuasion by Drew. I didn't hear any more of Jaden's complaints after that. As I exited the closet, opting to drag the large table into the event room, Drew called for me one last time. I hurriedly set up the table and walked over. I almost forgot to tell you the rules of bingo night here. Jaden was kindly reminding me about Rule 2. Jaden rolled his eyes and returned a second glance at me. As Drew spoke, Jaden did his best not to make eye contact while desperately trying to look at me, almost as if I were a car wreck. Drew pulled out a folded piece of paper from his breast pocket and began to read. Rule 1. Once the games start, no one is allowed to leave until the third game has concluded. No bathroom breaks, no smoke breaks, nothing. Residents know this already and won't need to be informed. Jaden will enforce this rule at the start of the night. Drew spoke as if he were teaching me how to mop floors for the first time, despite it being my livelihood. What's with the rules? These are rules for, like, high school tests, not a bingo night, I asked in confusion, unsure about why there were such tight standards for such a boring game. Well, unfortunately, I cannot tell you more. As Rule 2 states, Rule 2, do not discuss the events that take place during the games outside of game time. Failure to follow this rule will lead to... Well, I can't say that part. Strange how it's written down. What a loophole. He flipped the paper around for a second while he shrugged. There wasn't enough time to read any of the words, but I could tell Rule 2 was the longest. Rule 3. Everyone in the room must play, including the announcer and the helper. 2 employees must always be present. Refer back to Rule 2 if this requirement isn't met. Drew mumbled something under his breath about updating the rule sheet, while Jaden spun on his heels to face the opposite way. His foot tapped in nervous anticipation. No rhyme or rhythm. Final and fourth rule. All standard bingo rules apply to the match. And most importantly, have fun. Drew's face wrinkled as if he sucked on a lemon. His obvious distaste for the rules must have been applied to my face, as he swiftly reminded me of the overtime and double pay. If anything happens, Jaden will be here to help. I have to go now for a dinner date with the missus, but don't be afraid to contact me either. Happy wife, happy life. Am I right? He said with a chuckle and an elbow nudge before shuffling the rule paper back into his pocket and tossing his jacket on. Drew waved us goodbye and ran out of the room, as if he were already an hour late for dinner. Both Jaden and I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, before he finally cleared his throat. We should finish setting up. Bingo starts in an hour, Jaden said softly before returning to the utility closet. I almost spoke up to ask more questions, but caught myself. Rule 2 forbade Jaden from telling more, so what was even the point? I followed behind him quietly and finished setting up for the night. The next hour went by agonizingly quiet and slow. I tried my best to talk to Jaden during that time, but he either gave me short 1 or 2 word answers or completely cold-shouldered me. This didn't stop the awkward staring. I'd catch him in a 1,000-yard stare sometimes when I turned around, causing him to snap out of it and flick his head away. The first resident showed up as soon as we finished setting up the bingo cage and set out 3 bingo sheets at each chair. Jaden was still placing a few daubers at each of the tables when she strolled in. The frail woman placed all of her weight on her blue stroller. Her pink glasses barely sat on her long and slender face as she walked, and the little basket of items that dangled off the stroller looked like it could fall at any moment. I jogged over to help her find a chair. "Oh, hello, sweetie. You're a young and new face. What's your name?" she asked as I got close. Her knitted sweater and long brown slacks all smelled of tomato soup. "I'm Mickey. And you, ma'am?" I said with a wide smile. The old woman fiddled with her kitten sweater and showed me her little name badge that all the residents and workers had. "Pauline, will you be the new announcer? Shame what happened to Patricia. Smart young woman," she asked as I walked her to the nearest seat. She had a collection of bright silver jewelry on her wrist and a silver key on a string around her neck to accompany it. "I think so. Jaden will do the announcing. May I ask what happened to Patricia?" I let the noisy part of me win. I knew it was probably an insensitive or a taboo subject around the crowd she was closest with, but the lack of any idea about what was going to happen made me only more curious about anything I didn't know about. "Oh, I can't tell you that, honey. I'm sure you read Rule 2, she said with a crooked laugh. My thirst and comfort in knowledge only backfired and made me hunger more. We approached the nearest table before she began pulling away and veering off in another direction. "Ma'am, where are you headed? This table is much—" She flapped her hand in a dismissive manner and spat in disgust into the air. "Blech. That spot is bad luck. The losers always sit there. The best seat in the house is up here." She lifted her bent and skinny fingers to the table right below the stage. She moved so quickly to the spot that when she lifted her hand, I thought she would topple over. As she sat down, she grabbed the small basket of items off her stroller and set it on the table. She took out candles, small wooden cat carvings, a framed photo of Jesus Christ, and small, round coins that looked like they could be currency from foreign nations. Mrs. Pauline started to set up each item in a circle around her small collection of bingo cards, candles on either side where her hands would rest. The cat's carvings would face inward and start the semicircle to its peak, where JC was placed perfectly, making eye contact with Miss Pauline. She would complete the semicircle with the coins, finishing her shrine of luck. While I was watching her crooked hands craft her totem, I failed to realize that the event center started to fill up with more residents, men and women, strollers and canes. Mobility scooters and oxygen tanks began to fill the floor, and chairs. The smell of the room darkened. Dead skin and pungent ammonia filled the air, making my eyes tear up. Not a single resident looked happy to be here. Nearly no one talked to each other, and all had the face of pure focus. At this point in their life, I don't think they had much to worry about than winning at bingo night. Jaden and I helped people to their desired seating and watched as they created their own luck shrines on the table. A man had brought a collection of fake eyeballs and banana peels to place them on, and a woman brought a collection of old, stained beanie babies, adorned with bright blue feathers. One man even started pulling out long, tangled strands of hair from his bag, placing the matted, rust-colored hair around his sheets. Each resident who came in had the same key around their neck that Miss Pauline had. Even the string it was attached to seemed to be from the same spool. "What are they not allowed to bring?" I whimpered to Jaden, hoping to make the distance between us just a little shorter. "Weapons, or anything that is weapon adjacent. Basically, anything that could make a hole in a person," Jaden answered back. I snickered at his comment and finally felt like the ice started to break. He laughed too, but quickly caught himself and turned to stone-cold silence. This, combined with the confusion from the past hour of my life, sent me over the edge into paranoia. I grabbed Jaden by the arm and dragged him over to an empty part of the room. He tripped over his long, skinny legs as I pulled him. What the hell is going to happen tonight? And why are you being so weird about it? I harshly let out. Thankfully, none of the residents seemed to have that good of hearing. Jaden hesitated to answer, his eyes bouncing from mine to the sea of residents behind us. Just wait until game time. Please, I can explain more then. I'm trying not to. A horrid screech filled the room and cut Jaden off. Both of our heads spun around and tried to locate the source. Get out of my spot. You know it's mine. I've sat here ever since I've been here. Get out. A woman screamed. I let go of Jaden, and we both rushed to the front of the room. The screaming came from an older woman at Miss Pauline's table, who was flailing her cheetah print purse around, hitting the table and smashing good luck items, and nearly colliding with Miss Pauline herself. Early bird gets the worm, Beatrice. Should have shown up earlier like me, Miss Pauline shouted in Beatrice's face. Beatrice turned red with rage. She held her purse tight and smacked Miss Pauline across the face with it. Ladies, please, it's not worth it. Jaden shouted as he grabbed Beatrice's bag and held it still. I ran to check on Miss Pauline, who was laughing like a witch. Oh, you've done it now. You won't get away with this. I'll be reporting to the board. Miss Pauline howled. Her glasses had a small crack in them, and the side of her face turned a faint purple. Are you all right, ma'am? I asked after coming out of pure shock. Oh, I'm just fine, honey. It just seems we have a sore loser back here, Miss Pauline shouted back to Beatrice. I hope you report me. Maybe that way I don't have to play these stupid games anymore, Beatrice shouted back, who rested uneasily in her chair in the back of the room. Jaden walked to the wide double doors and closed them at the back of the room. I checked my watch and saw that we only had a few minutes before game time, so I hurried over to him to call the game off after the tussle. Jaden, hey, we need to cancel tonight. Miss Pauline could have a concussion for all I know, and we need to get a nurse from assisted living upstairs to make sure she's all right. Jaden ignored my pleas and pulled out a silver key of his own. It was bigger than the residence, and it fit perfectly into the wide double door, where it then locked us in. What are you doing? You saw what I saw, right? Are we just gonna ignore it? I shouted, getting the attention of a few residents. We have to. It's game time now. We can't break the rules, was all Jaden said before he turned around and walked back to the stage, where the bingo cage waited like a guillotine. Jaden, its executioner. I followed him, screaming at him the whole time. He didn't flinch or stop his crusade up to the stage. The only sign he wasn't a robot was the silent quiver in his lip and the watery film that covered his eyes. I started to panic. My breathing became erratic, and my heartbeat was off tempo. Just give me the key then. I can leave. And you can play the game. I can bring in a nurse from upstairs. Please, Jaden. Anything. Anything, I shouted, finally stopping him in his tracks. I can't. Rules 1 and 3. I'll announce this first round so you can see how it's done. Just walk around and play. Make sure no one is cheating. I'm sorry. One of the watery films on his eyes broke, and a tear streamed down his face. My eyes were inspired and began to cry out in confusion. Jaden made his way up on stage and stood behind the table with the bingo cage and tapped the microphone, causing the room to ring. Sorry about that, everyone. Does everyone have 3 cards, a dauber, and their key? No protests from the crowd, except for my soft whines, which I was desperately trying to hide. Jaden walked to the corner of the stage with the supplies in hand and gave them to me. The bingo cards were nothing special. Same with the dauber and the key. I shoved everything but a card and a dauber into my pocket and made it to the back of the room to watch over everyone. I was closest to Beatrice, whose death stare was directed towards the front of the room at Miss Pauline, who was more focused on her card. Beatrice's shrine was adorned with bright, shiny objects, Small glass marbles and small lockets sat loosely around her cards. They all seemed to be placed in some type of bird feed or grain to keep them from rolling away. "All right, here is the first ball of the evening," Jaden said into the microphone, letting a ball fall into his hand. The room was deathly quiet. Everyone was either so focused on listening or deathly afraid of what might happen next. But no one was shaking quite like me. My card was flapping like a flag in the wind as my hand shook. "B7. Jaden acknowledged with no flair or excitement, only a small wobble in his voice. I checked my card. Nothing. I looked up to see the tides of residents checking their cards, some dabbing, and others taking a deep breath. 025. Another number rang out. This time I had it in the top right corner. The little purple dot sat soundly on top of the number, making the free space slightly less lonely. I saw Beatrice dab her paper. Miss Pauline as well. N8. The majority of people in the room dabbed their paper, including Jaden and me. I placed my purple dot in the top middle. G90. The dauber sat still in my hand. G39. The dauber placed a small dot next to the free space again. I-83. I saw Jaden turn his head away from the edge of the ice and take a deep breath. A sigh of relief washed over his face. The same couldn't be said for me. I placed the purple dot adjacent to the free space. Only 2 more until bingo. B55. Beatrice made a sound as if she were holding in rage as she dabbed the paper. B71. Nothing from those I knew the name of, but the other residents dabbed their papers. 034. I plotted the small dot in the bottom right. G20. I plotted another small dot next to that one. A bead of sweat dripped from my face and hit the paper. I-33. Nearly no one in the room dotted their paper, except Jaden. N-41. Jaden dotted again. O-88. And again. He let a cough out into the mic, his voice dry. "Sorry, everyone. B60. I dotted my paper. Only 1 left in a bingo. Bingo. A weak voice called nearby. Hey, we have a bingo. We have a bingo over here." Beatrice screamed at the front of the room. Jaden motioned for me to check. The voice that claimed bingo came from the small man sitting next to Beatrice, who had not crafted a shrine like the majority of people. He only had a framed picture of what seemed to be his grandkids visiting him, all playing a board game. He wore a plaid shirt and jeans with oversized glasses. He had a distinct sniffle in his voice. Keep it down," he tried to tell Beatrice, his hands weakly trying to keep her flailing arms down. I walked up behind him to check his card. The card was a winner after all, a straight horizontal row. "Congratulations, we do have a winner," I said loudly but not confidently. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but no one in the room clapped. Silence from the whole room, except for the start of the old man's sobs. Everyone stared at the man as he stood and grabbed the photo. "Please collect your belongings, sir, and exit the room," Jaden said over the microphone. The man nodded weakly as he began to walk the stage. I couldn't look away as the whole room stared at him, slowly shambling towards the stage stairs. As he passed by plastic tables, those who sat at them reached out to touch the man. Their wrinkly fingers grazed his wrinkly shirt as he passed, almost as if they were mourning him as he walked to the electric chair. Some seemed to do it out of pity, some seemed to do it out of solidarity, and some seemed to do it for luck. As Miss Pauline wiped both of her hands on the man, on like the gentle touch every other resident did. "Get me out of this seat immediately. I told you this table was bad luck." Beatrice snarled at me in a quiet tone. I didn't bother to respond as I watched the old man pull out the key around his neck. He placed it in the palm of his hand as he approached the set of double doors near the stage stairs. The old man brought up the photo of his family to his face and kissed it, tears making the paper damp. "I love yous," he said before unlocking the door. The door opened into a dark room. No lights shone from inside, and none of the lights inside the event room seemed to penetrate the darkness. The old man took a deep breath and stepped inside. He closed the doors as he entered, and the click of the lock sounded again. A few moments of silence passed. Then the old man's slow footsteps could be heard walking away. The footsteps echoed loudly into the event room and went on for minutes. I couldn't tell if he was walking away and the echo carried the sound back, or if he was going in circles. I snapped out of my daze of staring at the doors when Jaden tapped me on the shoulder. Mickey, you alright?" he asked, sweat pouring off his face. I took a moment to compose myself. "What is he doing?" I asked, breaking the sound of the repetitive footsteps. "He won. That's what happens if you win. That's why there's no prize table. Winners have to go in there. It's what happened to Patricia in the second round last month. I never saw her again," Jaden told me, staring into my eyes but past my soul. "What happens to you in there?" I asked, afraid of what he might answer. I don't know. Only those who go in know." Jaden joined me as we watched the door, the sounds of footsteps echoing from the opening underneath. "I can keep reading the numbers if you'd like. I really don't mind. He went silent as the footsteps went silent. The room's only noise the heavy and labored breathing of the elderly. No, I can read, it's fine," I said, trying to stop my head from spinning. I started for the stairs before Jaden stopped me again. Maybe reading numbers could distract my brain from thinking too hard about the scenario in front of me. "Look, I'm sorry for being so distant. Patricia was my best friend, and I can't have that happen again." His lip quivered. He looked like he wanted to say more, but I understood. I patted his shoulder and headed for the bingo cage. I sat down in the seat and pulled the microphone close. I pulled out a crumpled card from my pocket and placed it on the table. "Hello, everyone." My voice was soft, quiet, unsure. "If everyone could get a new card out and toss the old one, we could play game 2. I wobbled into the mic. The crowd of residents grabbed their cold cards and crunched them into a ball. Those with shrines added the balls of paper to it. Those without tossed it on the floor. "Everyone ready?" "All right." The first ball fell into my hand. 092. I looked at my paper. Nothing. I looked up to survey the crowd. Jaden was busy arguing with Beatrice about her seat, while some of the crowd dabbed their paper, including Miss Pauline. "B1. The second ball came out, and this time I splotched my paper with purple. Jaden did the same, and Beatrice followed suit, her red and bubbling face easy to spot from far away. N68. Nothing on mine again. A few dabs from the crowd, but nothing remarkable. I-77. Luck was on my side this round, as only 2 marks sat on the paper. Jaden's paper didn't seem to be so lucky. Maybe being near the table wasn't so much a superstition after all. G4. No one I knew marked their paper. 05. Everyone I knew marked their paper, including me. B54. Another mark for Jaden. I-76. Another mark for me. G98. No one except 2 people in the crowd marked. "Bingo!" A smoker's voice called out. A woman from Miss Pauline's table stood and held the paper above her head. The woman was slender and wore a tank top with flowers stitched in. She had a navy blue cap on with countless pins stuck in it. She moved it as if she were younger, but her voice sounded as if it had been talking for a century. "Come down here and check it out," she said, putting on a strong front. Jaden was already making his way over to her. After a second, Jaden gave me a nod. My stomach tightened and my mouth grew sour. I took a few deep breaths before I spoke again, to avoid throwing up over complete guilt. I announced into the microphone the commanding order for her death march. After the last of my words left my mouth, I refused to look her in the eye. I couldn't. I didn't even know if she was looking back at me. I heard her shrine of twigs and soda cans being scooped up. "You know, we used to do this to your people. They never complained. They did what was right." I looked back to see that she was facing Jaden. Jaden just nodded and pressed his lips together. The woman broke away from Jaden as she walked to the door. Residents held out their hands to touch her. Miss Pauline rubbed her hands on the woman, who swatted them away, dropping a few sticks in the process. Miss Pauline pushed the sticks away with the base of her stroller. The woman grabbed her key with a free hand and unlocked the wide double door. She stepped inside with her items, locked the door, and walked. She walked and walked, footsteps echoing for minutes well into the next game. Jaden and I looked at each other. "I'm sorry," I mouthed. He shrugged, and mouthed something back. "You good?" I think that was what he said. I nodded and started to crumble my piece of paper. The room sounded like a paper shredder as everyone, in unison, crumpled their paper up and discarded it. The footsteps were much more noticeable with the doors so close to the stage. I imagined the old woman walking in a straight line in pure darkness. Nothing for miles. I saw her traversing a long tunnel system. I saw her finding the old man from earlier, and I imagined them finding Patricia. I tried imagining all of them alive. "Are we going to play?" Miss Pauline's voice croaked out, and I found myself back in reality. Yes, we are. X's for the last game," I announced as the cage began to spin. "Miss Beatrice, would you like to come up to the front for the open spot?" I called to the crowd. No response was given, only a glare. I decided to stick to announcing the numbers. B12. The ball read. I called the number into the air and watched the crowd respond accordingly. I marked my sheet. B10. I marked my sheet again. O71. I marked my sheet once more. I43. My sheet started to turn more purple than black and white. My mouth grew dry, and my face moist. I22. I started to curse under my breath the more I marked my card. G95. I marked again, trying not to panic. The footsteps in the background started to taper off. O20. The ball read. "What the?" I whispered to myself. Some of the words being picked up by the microphone. I marked my paper again. I was one way from a bingo. I looked up to look over the crowd. Many faces seemed to share my dread. Jaden's being the most noticeable. His mouth was agape, staring up at me. His eyes seemingly shook in his head. I spun the cage and the next ball came out. N90. I let out all the air I held in my lungs, the sigh of relief showering the room with noise. I79. A voice crack read the number aloud. The only thing keeping me from the dark hallway, or room, or whatever the hell that place is, was an I24. N28. Any number that wasn't the one that would lock me away didn't do much to quell the anxiety, but it helped, even if it was just for a second. B63. A few marks, including one on mine that didn't matter. I5. I nearly vomited right on the microphone. A few sounds of anger came from the crowd. O10. Jaden marked his. None on mine. G11. I marked mine. I didn't care about looking at the crowd anymore. G69. No dabs on my end. B9. I marked mine again. I16. Another near accident. The beat of my heart now mimicked the sound of the missing footsteps. G23. Jaden marked. I didn't. N81. No marks. O15. No marks again on mine. G45. My heart started to slow down. My breathing calmed and my stomach settled. As bad as the thought was, I hoped someone else would win. That someone else would lose. That anyone would say bingo before we got to. I-24. I read the number and letter on the ball, replaying it in my head. People marked their sheets and got ready to listen to the next number. I-24. I read it again, like tasting wine in my mouth. Rotten, putrid, vile wine. Despair and hopelessness swam in my veins. Bleh. I gagged as the word tried to roll out of the back of my throat. I don't know what was on the other side of that door, but I knew it was nothing good. I couldn't run. Could I fight? Could I break my way out? Jaden would have felt pity, but whatever sort of messed up ritual I was partaking in was his top priority, for reasons he probably didn't even know, and there was no way I could win in a fight against him. I figured I could at least try. I took a deep breath and balled my fists. All I needed to do was grab the key from him and book it. I just needed him close. Ben. I started to speak into the mic before an explosion of anger boiled over from the back of the room. "This is all your fault," Beatrice screamed as she pointed to Miss Pauline. Miss Pauline's face was painted with shock. "You took my lucky spot. You took it from me. And you know it. You stole all of my luck." She screamed again, getting to her feet with shocking agility. "I'm not going in there. She should have to. If I had sat there, I wouldn't have gotten a bingo. It's not fair. I'm the winner here." She screamed at the room as everyone stared in silent awe. Her face was covered in tears and snot, making her mascara run. "It's the fairest system we have ever used, Beatrice, and you know it," Miss Pauline said in a mix of fear and snarkiness. "Screw you." Beatrice started to move as fast as her withered body would let her, which was faster than I would have ever thought. She made it to Miss Pauline's table in seconds and lunged for her, tackling her out of her chair. Both women seemed to scream in pain and rage. Each of them exchanged weak blows. Jaden rushed over to pull Beatrice off, and I dropped off the stage to make sure Miss Pauline was still breathing. Before either of us made it to the brawl, the double doors near the stage slammed open, sounding like a gunshot and grabbing everyone's attention. Jaden and I froze in fear. Both of the elderly women looked up to see the void staring back at them. A soft but warm breeze blew in from the doorway, bringing the faintest smell of overripe fruit. A few of the residents got to their feet and slowly backed away from the doors, walking until they hit the farthest wall away. Besides the soft mumbles of prayers, no words were spoken. I almost didn't believe my eyes when a shape emerged from the doors. Neither did anyone else, as the room stayed silent, except for the screams of Beatrice. I tried to scream. I tried to move, but everything in my body was frozen in shock. As the alien object slowly emerged, it revealed its horrible, amalgamated body. It had patches of brown, white, and black fur that periodically appeared, and then turned into hardened chitin that looked like it belonged to a crab. The chitin fought the fur for control of the surface area, but it also had another offensive that it was battling. Jelly-filled ant-like abdomens pulsated on the body of the object, covered with a smooth black material. Hairs emerged from the pus-filled exoskeletons that touched the feathers that flanked them. Small, colorfully black feathers like a rainbow in oil dotted the limb like poppies in a field. Larger patches of black feathers mixed with patches of deep purple and navy ones. All the different clans of skin and body had other features that mimicked the species they belonged to. The fur regions had snouts that flexed and twitched in the air, sniffing the room, drowning out the silence in harsh inhales. The chitin biomes had crab claws that would stretch as far as their wrong anatomy would let them, as they would grab and reach for shrine parts on the tables. The beaks of the feathered areas did the same as the eyes observed photos and small trinkets. The antennae in the insect zones jolted and snapped, sensing the slightest of movements. The antennae all moved in unison as soon as Beatrice started screaming. The limbs of all the different species that lived on craned themselves over to her, towering over everyone in the room. "Get it away! Get it away from me!" She screamed as she tried to scurry away from it. She crawled as fast as she could on all fours, hiding underneath tables as it slowly inched closer to her. No one dared to move or speak. No one dared to help. Most didn't dare to even look. The beaks and claws grabbed hold of the tables and picked them up with ease to gain access to Beatrice, who was now curled up in a ball, crying out all the liquid left in her body. Miss Pauline laughed a broken giggle as the tail-like limb got closer to her bingo rival. The limb began to crawl around Beatrice, embracing her in a twisted, animalistic squeeze. "Get off me! Please, I beg! Please!" Beatrice screamed. The limb didn't obey her sorrowful commands as the peaks and pincers held on to her skin, clothes, hair, anything they could grab. Beatrice screamed in agony as she was lifted into the air by the limb, small drops of blood dripping from her flailing body. The limb began to recede into the darkness. She reached her hands out to Jaden, then to me, then to Miss Pauline. None of us reached back, either from shock, fear, or pride. As the limb receded, the antenna took an interest in me. They all turned to me as the beaks and claws passed Beatrice down the limb's body, like an assembly line of ants with a crumb of food. They stared inquisitively for a second, as if they were judging the character of my being, before returning to mindless squirming. Beatrice yelped and begged for help, only intensifying as she got consumed by the darkness of the doorway. No one did anything as she disappeared. Beatrice's screams went on for a while after she disappeared. They got quieter and quieter, at a slow and agonizing pace. You could still hear them when the ambulance came to take Miss Pauline to the hospital for the injuries Beatrice gave her. You could still hear them as the residents exited the room. You could still hear them when Jaden and I collected the trash. You could still hear them when we put away the tables and chairs. You could still hear them as we locked the event room for the evening and headed straight to a bar. We both got hammered as fast as possible, drowning out the ringing of screaming and the weight of guilt in our hearts. We drank for hours until the bar closed. We went to the local liquor store to keep the day from materializing in our memory. Jaden and I sat on a street curb and laughed at every little innocuous thing that happened until his drunk brain randomly remembered something. "Did you know, Mick, did you know that I am a bird watcher?" He looked very proud of himself. I burst out into laughter. "No, it's true. It's true. I think their colors are very, very, very pretty," he exclaimed, pulling out his phone and failing his passcode a dozen times before finally getting in. He was typing for a long time and giggling to himself before falling over onto his back, letting out a melancholy sigh. He held his phone up to me. His notes app was open with a very confusing line of letters. I tried my hardest to decipher his drunk typing. "The feathers." I started to say aloud before Jaden shushed me. "Read it in your head," he said back to the earth, face to the sky, still. "The feathers and peaks belong to birds. Lots of birds. Different species. Woodpeckers, corvids, bowerbirds. They all collect things. It collected Beatrice. the note said. I felt the alcohol of the night scalding the back of my throat. I purged all over the street as Jaden laughed. I used the loophole. He giggled to himself. All of the numbness left my body and my stomach ached, and in its place, every little detail came rushing back. I began to drunkenly sob next to Jaden. I'm putting in my 2 weeks tomorrow. Screw that. I'm quitting now. A proclamation into the night air, causing Jaden's joy to seize. You can't leave me there alone. I never did that to Patricia. She never did that to me, Jaden said, his voice stern. You won't leave me, right? I don't want to be... Collected. I knew what he meant. I didn't say anything back. You'll get better pay. I get paid $40 an hour on bingo days, he offered. I said nothing back. It's so addicting to be there, the rush of chance, but I can't be alone if I lose, please, he pleaded. His voice cracked as he spoke. His true motivation for staying surfaced. Don't. You can't. Promise me, he whispered. That's where the memory of the night ended before I woke up in my bed the next day, head pounding. I rolled over to look at my phone, knocking over a Powerade bottle. One text from an unknown number. Hey, it's Jaden. Thanks for staying. See you next month. I hate therapy, I thought. My friends begged me to go. Their plea evolved into a demand by the time that they were done and wiped their teary eyes. They had threatened to call 911. They knew about the gun, the pills, the liquor. But all the screaming came to an end when we found middle ground in the form of a support group that met on Tuesday nights at the community rec hall. Agreeing to it shut them up. It wasn't quite therapy, I reminded myself, but it felt just as unpleasant. I figured in a few sessions, they'd lose interest and assume that I'd been successfully indoctrinated into the watchful arms of my equally broken and mourning peers. Then I could stop going when they were no longer paying attention. I'd make an effort to smile a bit more, so they'd think that they saved my life. If they asked, I'd say it was going well, and then they'd give me the space that I wanted all along. It was distracting in a pitiful way, at least. I'd rather be at home hiding under a blanket, quietly mad at the world by myself. But I'd be fine either way. Just, at the moment, I was in the thick of it. That's all. The grief group, as I'd come to call it, was small. The few meetings I'd attended were only a handful of core regulars, and a few transient faces that I never saw again. I wondered if they had been forced to go like I was, but bailed quicker than I had the luxury. This Tuesday was no different. I hunched forward and nonchalantly swirled my now cold coffee in its paper cup, while the man beside me, Steve, spoke in stern, careful words. He was wrapping up his monologue. He was a good man. His voice hitched. Emotion visibly boiled up inside him, and he tensed, waving his fist in the air. It's nonsense that he had to die. Steve was a fireman, and an old head at that. He wore the scars that any smoke eater would be proud to carry, but the sinew of his grief never quite healed, and the wound was raw, even years later. Surely his department paid for better options. Why he joined our sorry rank baffled me. He could be in a cozy office with a professional that toted a degree and prestigious reviews, resting in a plush ottoman with sparkling mineral water. Not slumped in a wobbly plastic chair, in a tired building that smelled vaguely of cat piss, led by a burned-out priest with a cup of watered-down Folgers. I counted the coffee grounds and the dregs of my semi-translucent brew. I added another to the tally as I rolled one over my teeth. But who was I to judge? He was here. So was I. However, he, more than any of us, had a right to be sad. The rest of us? The junkie? Self-inflicted. The workaholic? Weird. The dog mom? Just insane, to be honest. Myself? It's life. Steve broke down. He shouldn't have died, he choked, holding his scrunched face in his hands while the frail, young addict beside him gently rubbed his back. Steve welcomed the embrace. Grief group's leader, the priest, offered his condolences and thanked Steve for sharing. Others agreed and offered their heartfelt, brief words as well. Then followed the transitional phase as the focus began to switch targets. This was always the most anxiety-inducing part for me. Modern therapy no longer forced participants to speak. Nonetheless, I dreaded the minuscule chance that I'd be summoned to speak. To my relief, a mouse of a woman spoke up instead. When you mentioned how he was a light through all the bad you've seen, she continued, it just reminded me so much of my Chester. I know he was just a dog. Emily, Steve interrupted, speaking reassuringly. Sorrow isn't a competition. If you're here, then you're hurting just as much as I am. He smiled through his tears and her eyes welled up in response. She returned a big, snotty grin and thanked him for his kindness, wishing that he had been the firefighter that responded to her own tragedy once upon a time. They had connected on some bizarre level, and the group leader praised the point about sorrow, that it couldn't be ranked or scaled. The coffee cup was empty now, but I desperately hoped that it would magically replenish itself. I stared wide-eyed into the empty vessel. Steve was a saint. I would have been furious if Emily related my story to her crusty dog. I tuned them out, leaning forward and studying the faded pattern of the dingy floor. But my eyes wandered to my right. Beside me was a woman I didn't recognize, another transient. But color me curious. She was the oddest in the bunch to ever wander through. Overdressed, she wore a cream suit and pencil skirt that fit her in a way that only a high-end tailor could create. A deep, red blouse vibrantly emanated from her chest like a bleeding heart, and her satin flats complemented the color. Her skin was tan and smooth, and her face impossibly perfect. Her long silver blonde hair was tied neatly behind her head, and she perched with perfect posture, keenly and wordlessly observing the group like a lioness. I couldn't help but feel nervous beside her. I watched her quietly through the corner of my eye, when she abruptly averted her gaze to lock with mine, smirking. I flinched. I'm sorry, I whispered, searching for an excuse. I like your suit, I lied. My face grew hot with blush. She smiled back sharply, and with narrow, tight lips, she leaned into me, whispering, It gets worse. I caught myself mid-breath. I recoiled. I had expected her to express gratitude or mutter where she got it, but that? Her words almost felt like a promise. A threat. What? I blurted. Jessica? Eric, the volunteer priest, questioned. I'm glad to finally hear you speak, but you should let Emily finish first. Then you can have all the time you need. I apologized profusely and wondered if I could hide inside my paper cup. Is this what she meant by worse? Emily picked up her spiel about Chester, how Chester filled the void when she and her husband kept getting negative pregnancy tests, how Chester loyally stood beside her when her husband was turned into a meat crayon on the interstate. Now Chester was gone. The pampered Shih Tzu barely made a meal for the eagle that took him to feed its eaglets. I'd have laughed if I wasn't already trying to hide. I didn't mean to bully the woman. It's just, it was a dog, and the whole eagle detail, and we were all absurd dorks, clustered in a circle in our linoleum cat piss kingdom. You just couldn't make this up. When Emily finished, I excused myself. The meetings rarely went beyond an hour, 75 minutes tops. and we were at 52 by the time Emily stopped sobbing about the bird. I'd drink the memories of that night away, like all the others, and I'd be spared remembering again for a week until Tuesday rolled around at 7 p.m. sharp. I made a point of waiting in my car while I saw someone else walk in. Emily. I quickly jogged up behind her so that we could enter together, and I wouldn't attract all of the attention to myself. She pulled the door open for me and gestured for me to enter with a warm smile. I thanked her. She was undeniably kind, too soft for this monstrous world. Inside, the core group waited in their usual haunts. Steve encouraged the young addict, Trevor, who nodded with gratitude. Richard sat quietly by himself. The bags under his eyes seemed darker than ever, and Emily and I trotted to our seats. Everyone except Eric was present, and I was surprised to see the mysterious woman in his place. I can already sense the questions. She spoke in a subtle drawl as she watched me take my seat. Eric couldn't make it. I'll be taking over. My name is Leandra. She spoke factually, and although she wore an expressive smile, her eyes felt more predatory than jovial, and her words felt too calculated. We'll be trying something new tonight, she added. Her smile grew impossibly large, revealing a small smudge of dark red lipstick on her left incisor, marring her otherwise polished appearance. Without warning, the lights cut out and we were plunged into darkness. We fumbled in our normal space when a single overhead light re-illuminated with wavering brightness. It cast a gold cone around our circle, but the rest of the building was still impossibly black. To our greater surprise, Leandra was gone. I shivered, watching a wisp of my breath escape me. The light took the heat with it, apparently. The others shuffled and babbled to themselves, frustrations rising to a crescendo, but Trevor remained quiet, breathing heavily to himself in disbelief, nearly hyperventilating when he finally, slowly, reached up towards a solitary snowflake. Guys, the early 20-something stammered. The others fell silent. I've been mostly sober for 7 months now, but I still take a hit sometimes. I took one tonight. Is this real? Well, Richard spoke with a growl, firmly slapping his hands on his thighs to push himself to standing. He had a low, calibrated tolerance for BS. Screw this. He repositioned his tie and moved abruptly towards the general direction of the door, disappearing into the shadows. Emily and Steve rushed after him out of concern, but I was paralyzed in place, watching Trevor's frantic breath escape his hooded face like a factory's exhaust. I'll be right back. I finally spoke, dumbly, lost in words and actions. I slipped through the darkness beyond our space, and found myself inexplicably lost. I called to the others, but I heard nothing in response. I spun to gain my bearings and realized all the obvious landmarks of the tired rec room were gone. The coffee corner, the little office area, the closet rack, all lost. Even the halo of our circle of chairs had vanished. I panicked. I flailed as whispers and hushed laughter spun around me on secret currents, slowly closing the gap. All the while, I could hear a familiar voice growing louder and louder. You abandoned him. It spoke barely above a whisper, so quietly perhaps it was only a phantom thought. You abandoned him. Louder. You abandoned him, Jessica. Yelling now. Its breath and spittle brushed against my neck. It was practically on top of me. I punched blindly and stumbled, but I could see the light of our small haven far in the distance once again. I jumped to my feet and ran while the sinister whispers chased me. Once inside the light, I realized Trevor had slumped to the floor. He was as blue as a corpse, and I would have thought he had died had he not gasped lightly while I grabbed him. His skin was cold and stiff. I never wanted this. He spoke slowly between weak shivers. It calmed the noise in my head. 14. I was only 14 when I had my first hit. Since then, I overdosed 3, 4, 5 times. I've lost count. Why are you telling me this? I interrupted. He continued, undeterred by my tactless stupor. But I told my buddies that when you overdosed, none of it hurt anymore. It just felt like falling asleep in a snowstorm. His teeth chattered and the snow began to accumulate on top of us in thick sheets. Each of them fell asleep in the snow, and I found them cold and blue with the needle still in their veins. And now I can't even be better for them and stay sober myself. He grimaced. Trevor. I realized then that was the first time I had called his name in the few weeks that I'd known him. No, man, you made one mistake. It'll be okay. You're still talking and breathing. That's better than most folks that get Narcaned. Trevor slowly mimed the action of a needle in the crook of his arm and grinned pitifully, but his humor faded as an icy blue vein spread across his arm where the imaginary needle would have been. He screamed in terror. I panicked and grabbed his arm, thinking I could stop its spread, but to my horror, when I jerked and squeezed, his limbs shattered like an icicle. I lost my balance when his arm released, and my foot splayed out, kicking him by accident. Trevor exploded into 100 frigid crystals and scattered around me. My first startled instinct was to grab the pieces, as if I could reassemble him, but the hope faded quickly as the pieces slipped through my fingers and shattered more. The air began to warm, and the shards of Trevor grew increasingly slick as they melted, and when the others found their way back, there was nothing left but a puddle and myself sprawled across it. "Where's Trevor?" Steve asked, his voice wrought with worry. "You abandoned him." The voice ran through my head. "It gets worse." Another. "He's dead," I spoke flatly, watching a water drop drip from my arm. I was wringing my sleeves when Leandra reappeared. 1 minute, I scanned the empty seat where Trevor usually sat. The next, she rested comfortably, legs crossed astutely and wearing the same manic smile she had before. The group shifted uncomfortably. I steadied my heart and observed her. She was worse for wear now, and her skin sagged. Her flawless complexion sported liver spots and blemishes, and her kempt hair was a mess with stray ends and flyaways. Makeup clumped in the crow's feet beside her eyes. Her white suit was dull, and I couldn't help but notice that her teeth seemed sharper in her wicked grin. Steve quickly moved in to question. No, demand answers. He steamrolled her, yelling and hurling his anger at her. Leandra's facade cracked but a moment, and her grin morphed into a pursed frown. "We'll get to you in time, fireman," she spoke, shooing him away. To my surprise, he abruptly sat. "There's no flame to extinguish but your own. Best douse that fiery heart of yours until later." Her smile returned, and she brushed a fleck from her lap. "Now, Richard." Her face whipped at breakneck speed to the middle-aged man. "You choose your words carefully. You don't say much, but you say enough. What was so gut-wrenching about being fired from a job you hated?" "I wasn't fired." Leandra raised an eyebrow. "I was let go." She nodded empathetically. "And your wife still thinks that what you're doing every day, right? And that the recent late hours are for a big project with whispers of a promotion, right?" Her wicked grin grew wider with each word she spoke. Richard's face twisted to a look of disgust and fear. "Who are you?" "Well, I'm Leandra, of course, and I'm here for group grief." She batted her hand playfully with the phrase and winked at me. My stomach churned. "Richard, For what purpose? I mean, surely your work had to be noble to sacrifice so much of your humanity, of your soul. She leaned forward and clutched her chest as she spoke for dramatic effect. She studied him intently. Richard sat defiantly, despite the fact that his blood pressure skyrocketed with every second in her presence. He kept his posture relaxed, so as to not let her realize how deeply she terrified him. I was an analyst. He spoke cautiously. A financial analyst. And it just so happened that our biggest expendable cost was keeping me on. Dastardly, Leandra hissed, shaking her head. What was it like in the belly of that machine? They worked us to the bone, he calmly replied. Fascinating, Leandra chirped as she stood. I hadn't realized how tall she was until then. Previously, she sat so compactly and properly that she took up less space than one would expect. But when she stood, she stretched like a leopard, extending her powerful form in an impressive display. Well, I'll be back. I feel like we're really getting somewhere in this group's grief. She clapped her hands together. She toyed with the words, and the simple switch was enough to turn the cheeky name into a dreadful omen. Leandra stepped into the shadows without hesitation and quickly vanished. None of us dared to chase after her for fear of getting lost in the darkness again, so we waited, patiently, loathing our wet feet and confinement. Some time later, a noise caught my attention. A gentle grinding. The rhythmic grumble lingered, moving slowly around us in the dark. Occasionally it beeped. I ignored it as best I could. I should have told her, Richard mused, abruptly. My wife, I mean. I couldn't disappoint her. That wretched job took so much out of me that I didn't want it to take her security, too. I was going to find something better before I told her. He shook his head in defeat. I watched him silently. Steve was occupied soothing Emily. He sighed. I just didn't want to upset her. What is that noise? Richard hissed. Do you hear that? He stood and approached the border of light and darkness, craning his neck to listen. I hear it, but I don't think we should leave this light. I spoke hesitantly. I smoke. I have a lighter and matches. It's light. Here. He tossed a book of matches at me. It's a printer. It's right there. I can hear it. But we have to shut that thing off before I go insane. It reminds me too much of work. He stepped out of sight. Richard, wait. He was too quick, and I was too hasty myself, finding myself one step too far and enveloped in the same inky black full of hateful whispers. I grabbed a match and sparked it to life, desperately trying to get back and keep the shadows at bay, but it burned my fingertips before I could. I lit another as I heard the whisper sneer in the abyss. I winced as that flame bit my flesh too. I lit a third. The plastic surface hit me square in the belly with force. I ran right into it and cursed. The commercial HP printer whirred, shooting countless copies out of its top as it buzzed and shimmied. I reached down to grab a sheet of the discarded papers, intending to roll one into a torch, but frowned at the distorted, wretched face it printed. Each copy was a different iteration of a scarcely human expression pressed against the scanner, and screaming in agony. I shook my head and rolled the paper, illuminating the machine in front of me with a flash, when I noticed that the machine was bleeding. The paneling that housed the guts of the printer oozed with thick mucus and gore. Morbid curiosity got the best of me, so I pried at the cover, and it released with sticky tendrils of sanguine slime. I gasped as I saw what was underneath. Richard stared back at me. I could hardly recognize him, but his sagging eyes with those dark bags were unmistakable. He was viciously contorted. His mangled body had been eviscerated, inverted, and forced into the core of that vile device. His bones were snapped and his marrow exposed, used as scaffolding for components. His mouth had been split wide at its creases and some mechanism shoved inside. His intestines dripped with cyan and magenta and amber, pumping the dye to his sphincter above. His lungs inflated weakly in the cramped cube, lightly feathering paper through the folds of his skin. He had been bid to operate the machine to such an intimate and literal degree. I fell backwards and slapped my hand over my mouth. My rudimentary torch began to burn out, but I could still see his desperate, bloodshot eyes in the waning light, pleading at me for mercy. "What do you want me to do, Richard?" I screamed at him through tears as the torchlight snuffed. I grabbed another wad of paper to feed a fresh match. The metal ring of an overhead fire suppression caught the glint of flame. I knocked Richard over and pulled his doors off, exposing both his guts and the machines. He moaned quietly in what I presumed to be pain, muffled by plastic and screws. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, and stood on top of him to hold my torch at the overhead detector. The siren wailed and a torrent of water cascaded onto Richard and I. I tore my jacket off to funnel as much of the water as I could into Richard's amalgamized electrical components in hopes of putting him out of his misery. He sputtered and gasped briefly as the water filled the crevices of the machine, but his eyes stayed fixated on me. However, suddenly, they rolled into the back of his head, and sparks danced from various mechanical elements, until all the meat was flaccid and sizzling lightly. The suppression system dripped to a halt. Richard was gone. "You abandoned him," the voice in the void stirred. "She wouldn't have let me go even if I had known," I argued. "He died alone. You didn't try." "I did try. I wasn't welcomed." I'd lost track of how many times I repeated myself against the void while I tried to get back. It was maddening, the back and forth with such a spiteful specter. Suddenly I stumbled into the familiar, palely lit space. I didn't believe it at first, that I'd found my way back, and Leandra's distorted figure didn't soothe that disbelief. She sat calmly beside the remaining two. Her smile was wider and longer. In fact, her entire face seemed stretched as if she was growing a snout. The narrow slits of her pupils watched me intently as she licked her lipstick-stained fangs. Her clothing was saturated and frayed, like tufts of fur, and her hair was frazzled like a mane. Her red blouse looked more like the aftermath of a beheading sprayed across her breast. She'd lost her flats at some point, and her feet bent at sharp hock joints, connecting to a dirty, clawed feet. I stared at her nervously and silently for too long, eyeing the woman beast that tortured us, and wondering what trial she had in store next. "It's Prada, by the way," she chattered. "What?" I frowned as I spoke. "The suit." She held her clawed hand out and twirled her wrist up, admiring the chipped paint of her once immaculate manicure. I shook my head and my stomach bubbled. I looked at Steve and Emily. She was sprawled across 3 chairs on her side, facing away from me with Steve's jacket draped over her. As I approached them, Steve was quick to step aside, and he spoke to me in a hushed tone. "There's something strange going on." I stared blankly at him in disbelief. No crap, Sherlock, I thought. They hadn't seen what I had seen. They didn't know strange, like I did after what I'd been through. "Why are you wet?" he scrutinized. "Seems to be a theme tonight." Where's Richard?" Steve was anxious. "He's dead." The irritation in my voice was obvious. He nodded. "Listen, Emily is pregnant." "Excuse me? How? Did you guys... How long was I gone?" No, it's not like that. We don't know how, but we need to figure out how to get out of here. It's growing fast. It? I looked visibly uncomfortable. The baby, I mean. She swears she feels it kicking already, and she looks like she's already 7 or 8 months along. The whole mess makes me nervous. Right. I pulled myself back to reality. What about Leandra? I glanced at her briefly. I knew she had been watching us talk the entire time, but it still unnerved me to see her yellow eyes staring back so patiently. She hadn't said anything until you got here. What if we talk about the elephant in the room? I'll be on my way. She laughed. Her long legs carried her across the threshold faster than we could have even tried to stop her, if we had finished our desperate conversation and approached her with a plan. Steve sighed and turned to check on Emily, while a newspaper clipping drifted from the dark ceiling in front of me. I stooped to retrieve it, reading the bold letters. Hero firefighter saves family of 4. I looked somberly at the paper as more fell around me, all with similar titles and declarations. Soon the floor was covered. I guess you're next, I grimaced. Steve fidgeted nervously as the papers fell around him. Hey, just don't do anything. The others died when they did something. Trevor just froze solid as soon as he reacted to the snow, and Richard ran off. I stopped speaking as one title fell in front of me, catching my attention. Beloved firefighter put on leave after witness steps forward. And another. Charges dropped. Key witness dies in tragic house fire. The final page that drifted to the earth displayed a mugshot from the NSOPW registry. I recognized the face. I felt sick. He was a good man, but he shouldn't have opened his mouth. Steve spoke of the same man he wept for earlier, but now his voice was laced with malice. I stepped backwards, my heart skipping as I hit the resistance of the chairs behind me. The next step to freedom would be into the darkness if I chose to flee. But I can't say I blame him. The girl was his sister, after all. He rolled his eyes when he saw me reel away. Listen, don't get weird with me. We have to get out of here. He coughed. That's all behind me. These meetings have changed me. I placed one foot into the shadows as he reached towards me. Oh, come on. His cough grew worse. She was asking for it anyway. Even if I hadn't lit her brother on fire, she would have dropped the charges because she knew it was BS. He yelled the words with a frantic exhale, face reddening simultaneously with rage and desperation, and he wheezed and gasped. He clutched his chest and winced in pain as he fell to his knees. Please, God, Jessica, help me. His eyes widened as I watched smoke pour from his mouth the more he begged. He pulled his shirt off of himself, and beneath the tangle of his curly chest hair, his sternum glowed red with embers. Please, he wept, thick plumes of soot rolling from every orifice of his terrified being, when suddenly countless tendrils of hungry fire poured from his heart and chest while he screamed in pain, burning from the inside out. He flailed, screaming still, until his body curled into itself and he grew quiet so that only the crackling sound of the flame could be heard. An ember danced toward Emily, and I pulled myself together to push the paper and chairs away, to keep the fire from spreading to her. She hadn't moved nor reacted to the scene beside her at any point. I feared what I'd find as I approached her. Emily? I shook her lightly, carefully retracting Steve's jacket. I winced when I saw her. Her belly had grown far beyond the size of any normal pregnancy, even late term. She looked like an engorged tick stuck on its back. We have to leave, I pleaded. The baby is coming soon. I can't move right now. Emily's voice was quiet and groggy. She feigned excitement, but I could see the terror beneath her composure. Sit with me, she smiled, and she struggled to sit upright against her girth. I tried to hide my expression, but I couldn't help but feel queasy at the intricate veins and stretch marks that covered her pale, swollen belly. I pulled a chair across from her and sat nervously, dreading each passing second. Mark and I always wanted a big family, she cooed tiredly, placing a hand over her belly as she furrowed her brows. Mark? My husband. I nodded anxiously. We tried and tried and tried. Nothing. But then, God, when those little pink lines appeared, our world was nothing but joy. She spoke quietly as she replayed memories in her mind, smiling. We hadn't told anyone yet. It was too early, and we had so many failed attempts already. We wanted to be sure before we shared the celebration, but that never came. We were T-boned on the interstate. Mark was killed instantly, and I barely survived. But I lost the baby. We sat in silence together. Emily, do you think you can walk? We can go slow. I asked sheepishly. Darling, I don't think we have much longer to wait. He's kicking again. Feel, she squealed, grabbing my hand. I couldn't protest, but I gagged in my mind. I wanted nothing more than to get her and myself out of this hell, but she held my arm firmly in place against her engorged womb. I felt the fetus inside her side against my palm, and I nearly recoiled. Emily, I have no idea how we're going to do this. I mean, what if it isn't, normal, given everything else that's happened tonight? She had kept her resolute moral until that point, but a fleeting second her eyes flashed hidden fear before returning to her stoic peace. I know, but we have to hope, right? I nodded back timidly. Maybe she was right. Oh, God, Emily screamed. He's coming. I frantically helped her massive abdomen to the ground and bunched my jacket and Steve's behind her head as a brace before returning to the imminent task at hand. It's going to be okay, Emily. Push, I yelled over her screams. What if it gets worse? She cried. Don't say that. Amniotic fluid flooded from her crotch, soaking my legs as I knelt to help her, and her belly writhed in protest. Emily grunted and pursed her lips to slow her breathing. The fetus inside her flailed violently, and she screamed in agony. She pushed again, shooting an ungodly spray of meconium and salty fluid across my body and face. I was crying more than Emily. She pushed once more, and a tuft of dark hair emerged from her battered womb. He's crowning, I yelled, half excited, half terrified, and I wiped a tendril of mucus from my face with the back of my hand. He's crowning. Keep pushing, I repeated. I cheered. Her vulva split, and bright red blood trickled from her, spilling onto the infant's head, and, as if spurred to life by its mother's sacrifice, the newborn's head emerged in a tangle of deformed teeth and fur and furious growls. It flailed until it could pull a limb free from the restrictive birth canal and thrashed, nipping at me and its mother in frustration. I slid through the afterbirth across the floor, muted in disgust and horror as the half-dog, half-infant tore its way through Emily's pelvis. Finally freed, it kicked wildly, slipping as it tried to stand on its hind legs, and when it finally steadied itself, it chewed ferociously on the umbilical cord that tethered it to its mother. It yipped like a coyote when it spotted me, but it turned its attention back to its weakened host. It eyed her curiously, almost affectionately, before it sank its misshapen jaw full of needle teeth into her neck and thrashed its head to maim. I watched the light leave Emily's eyes. The feral cherub, content with its work, sniffed the air and growled. It ran on two legs towards me, sliding out of control on the gore-painted linoleum. It kicked and growled in my direction, spinning on its top-heavy head. It rolled, crouched, and shook itself, snarling as it broke into a quadrupedal sprint. Massive talons loomed from the dark and snatched the pup before it could reach me. The dog baby yelped and bit at the scaled feet, but the bird beat its wings without any concern. It sang one deafening note in the dark like a foghorn before it squeezed the dog in its grasp. The mongrel's head popped like a grape in the clutch of whatever possessed those cruel feet, and with another beat of its gruesome, tattered wings, it was gone. Tears flowed freely down my face. I couldn't take any more of this madness. With the last of my energy, I crawled to Emily, shaking her and pleading, "Emily, please get up. I'm here. We have to go." I wept. I shook her lifeless body. I knew she was dead, but I hoped, just as she had done. I hoped. I fell to the ground on my side, weeping profoundly. "Congratulations, Jessica," Leandra hissed from the shadows. I didn't know what she had in store, but I would surrender. I could not endure any more of her games. I reached forward to touch Emily's face, remaining bound to the floor at her level. "Please, Leandra, just get it over with," I groveled. No, you've suffered the most out of all of them. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" Quietly ranking grief as if it needed a quota to earn the right to be felt. Well, you've won. You are the queen of despair, a cataclysmic hurricane, force of sorrow, the most well suffered. Leandra was still concealed in darkness, but I could hear her smirk in the way she talked. She enjoyed this. I pushed myself partially up, pivoting at my hips and strained into the abyss. No, that's not what I wanted. You killed them. Me? No, don't throw such accusations. Their grief killed them. Nothing more. What's your plan for me, then? Well, now, that depends. Why are you here? She abandoned him. That wretched voice answered from its omnipresent haunt. That's not true. I would have been there. I snapped. I felt as if I were on trial. Oh, who did you abandon, Jessica? Were they afraid in the dark all alone? Leandra was mocking me. I knew it. My mother is a horrible person. She told him I had changed my number. She didn't tell me that he was dying. I would have been there if I had known. She wanted me to suffer. Leandra burst from the shadows, galloping with wicked, feline speed. The bloodied beast pounced, cutting me short, and I shielded my face with a scream. "Jessica?" Eric questioned, startled by my sudden outburst. "It's okay. You can speak when you're ready," he soothed. I uncovered my face, confused. There was no hungry tigress ready to end me in the dark. The incandescent bulbs hummed lightly, illuminating myself and the entirety of the room. I had knocked my empty coffee cup over at my feet. I scanned the room. Emily sat across from me, her loving eyes wrought with worry. Richard sat indifferently, but he granted patience, as he had always done. And Steve wore a brilliant mask of crocodile tears, next to Trevor, who stilled his shakes and listened intently. They were alive, as if nothing had happened. Beside me, the familiar cream suit loomed in my peripheral. I nearly gasped as it leaned into me to whisper, "It gets better." Leandra excused herself after the promise, while the others stared at me in silence and concern. I watched her lanky form slip from the rec room as mysteriously as she had arrived. The door clicked shut. Tears welled in my eyes until the dam broke, splashing down my face in silver streaks. I miss my dad.